The morning sun cast long shadows across the private terminal of Anderson Executive Airport as a well-dressed woman in her mid-30s walked confidently through the sliding glass doors. Her designer briefcase held important documents for the morning's upcoming business meeting, and her quilted leather handbag contained her pilot-approved flight documents. She had made this trip dozens of times before, but today felt different from the moment she stepped inside. The terminal's usual warm welcome was notably absent. Instead of the friendly faces she'd grown accustomed to, she was greeted by an unfamiliar pilot who stood near the check-in counter, his arms crossed and his expression stern. He watched her every move as she approached the counter, where a new receptionist sat looking uncertain. "I'm here for the 8:30 flight to Chicago," she said, sliding her documentation across the counter. The receptionist began processing her paperwork, but the pilot stepped forward, inserting himself into the interaction. "Ma'am, this is a private aviation terminal," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "The commercial terminal is on the other side of the airport." He didn't even bother to look at her documentation. The woman took a deep breath, maintaining her professional composure. "I'm aware of where I am," she replied calmly. "I've been flying from this terminal for the past 3 years. My documentation is all in order." The pilot picked up her papers, making a show of examining them with exaggerated skepticism. "These could easily be copied," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We need to be extra careful about security these days. Can't be too careful about who we let on these planes." Other staff members nearby shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the pilot and the woman. A young baggage handler even took a few steps forward as if to say something, but then thought better of it. The woman pulled out her phone and quietly began recording the interaction. She'd faced similar situations before and knew the importance of documentation. "I'm a registered client with over 50 flights through this company," she stated firmly. "You can verify my identity through the system." The pilot's face hardened. "System's been having issues lately," he claimed, though the receptionist's computer was clearly working fine. "Besides, I'm the captain of this flight, and I have final say over security concerns." He emphasized the word security while giving her another dismissive look. Just then, the terminal doors slid open again. The woman didn't turn around, but she noticed the pilot's eyes flick toward the entrance, and for a moment, his expression changed. She continued recording as she heard footsteps approaching behind her. The other staff members in the terminal had gone completely still, their faces a mixture of anticipation and relief. The young baggage handler, who had wanted to speak up earlier, now wore a slight smile, as if he knew something the pilot didn't. The woman stood her ground, dignity intact, knowing that sometimes the best response to ignorance was to simply let it reveal itself. She had learned long ago that her success spoke louder than any words she could say to people like this pilot. Still, she couldn't help but feel a small flutter of satisfaction as she heard those footsteps getting closer, knowing exactly who had just walked through those doors. The situation at the private terminal was growing more tense by the minute. The pilot had moved from behind the counter and was now standing directly between the woman and the path to the aircraft, his body language making it clear he had no intention of letting her board. "Look," he said, his voice taking on a false tone of patience, as if explaining something to a child. "Even if these documents are legitimate, which I'm not convinced they are, there are certain standards we maintain here." He gestured vaguely at her expensive business suit, implying that even her professional appearance somehow didn't meet these mysterious standards. The young baggage handler from earlier had disappeared into the back office, presumably to get a supervisor, while the receptionist frantically typed at her computer, trying to pull up additional verification that might satisfy the pilot's increasingly unreasonable demands. "I can show you my company ID," the woman offered, reaching into her handbag. The pilot took an exaggerated step backward, as if she might pull out something dangerous. A few other passengers waiting for different flights watched the scene unfold, some recording on their phones, others whispering among themselves. "Maybe we should call security," the pilot announced loudly, though he made no move toward the phone. Just to be on the safe side. Can't be too careful these days. He was putting on a show now, clearly aware of his growing audience. The woman stood her ground, her phone still recording. Please do, she replied calmly. And while you're at it, you can explain to them why you're refusing to honor a valid flight reservation. Her voice remained steady, though her fingers gripped her handbag a little tighter. The pilot's face reddened slightly. He hadn't expected such composed resistance. I'm not refusing anything. He backpedaled slightly. I'm simply following protocol. Extra verification is sometimes necessary. He emphasized the word sometimes in a way that made his meaning crystal clear. Just then, the terminal's atmosphere shifted. The whispering stopped. The pilot was mid-sentence about proper procedures when he noticed everyone's attention had shifted to something behind him. The woman kept her eyes forward, but a slight smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. A deep voice cut through the tension like a knife. Extra verification, you said. The words were calm, but carried an undeniable weight of authority. The pilot's shoulders stiffened at the sound, but he didn't immediately turn around. The other passengers who had been watching now had their phones raised higher, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The receptionist had stopped typing and was sitting perfectly still, her eyes wide. Yes, extra verification, the pilot repeated, though his voice had lost some of its previous confidence. As captain, it's my responsibility to ensure. As captain, the voice behind him interrupted, it's your responsibility to treat every passenger with respect and professionalism. Each word was measured, deliberate. A responsibility you seem to have forgotten. The pilot finally turned around, and the color drained from his face as recognition dawned. The next few moments would completely change the course of his career, though he didn't know it yet. What he did know, as he stared at the man standing before him, was that he had made a terrible mistake. The woman's phone was still recording, capturing every second of what was about to unfold. Sometimes, she thought, the most powerful response to prejudice isn't anger or argument, but simply allowing someone's true character to be revealed in front of the right audience. And this audience couldn't have been more perfect. The well-dressed businessman who had just entered the terminal carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who was used to being in charge. His tailored suit and leather briefcase might have been similar to any other executive's, but there was something different about his presence, something that made the pilot take an instinctive step backward. I've been standing here for the past few minutes, the businessman said, his voice remaining calm but firm. I'd watched everything unfold, and I have to say, I'm deeply concerned about what I've seen. He moved to stand beside his wife, placing his briefcase down slowly. The pilot's face had turned from red to pale, his earlier bravado evaporating like morning dew. Sir, I was just following security protocols. He began, but the businessman raised his hand slightly, and the pilot fell silent mid-sentence. Let's talk about protocols, the businessman said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a business card. As the majority shareholder of this aviation company, I'm very familiar with our actual protocols. He handed the card to the pilot, whose hands were visibly shaking as he took it. The terminal had gone completely quiet. Even the usual airport sounds seemed muted, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The other passengers who had been recording earlier were still filming, realizing they were witnessing something significant. Your name and badge number, the businessman asked, though it wasn't really a question. The pilot's hand moved unconsciously to cover his name badge, but it was too late. Don't worry, I already noted them both when I walked in. I just wanted to see if you'd be honest about it. The receptionist, who had been quietly watching everything unfold, was now quickly printing out what appeared to be flight logs and passenger manifests. Without being asked, she handed them to the businessman, who thanked her with a nod. My wife, the businessman continued, emphasizing those two words, has been one of our most valued clients for the past 3 years. She's flown with us 47 times, to be exact. He glanced at the papers the receptionist had handed him. Never a single incident until today. Until you. The pilot's attempt at professionalism had completely crumbled. Sir, I had no idea. If I had known. That's exactly the problem. The businessman cut in, his voice taking on an edge for the first time. You shouldn't need to know who someone is related to in order to treat them with basic respect and dignity. Every person who walks through those doors deserves the same level of professionalism. A small crowd had gathered now, including several airline staff members who had come out from their offices. The young baggage handler from earlier was back, standing with his supervisor, both watching intently as the scene unfolded. The businessman turned to address everyone in the terminal. What happened here today isn't just about one incident or one person. It's about a culture that needs to change. He turned back to the pilot. And change starts with accountability. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number, putting it on speaker. Board meeting. Emergency session. 1 hour. He ended the call without waiting for a response. The pilot stood frozen, clutching the business card like a drowning man holding a life preserver. The woman, who had remained calm throughout the entire ordeal, finally spoke up. I believe we have a flight to catch, she said, her voice steady. Though I'm not sure I feel comfortable flying with a captain who's demonstrated such poor judgment. The businessman nodded. Don't worry about that, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I believe Captain here was just about to call in his replacement and take some time to reflect on his career choices. The pilot nodded quickly, fumbling for his radio. As word of what was happening spread through the terminal, phones continued recording, and social media began lighting up with the story. What had started as one pilot's display of prejudice was about to become a moment that would spark change throughout the entire private aviation industry. Within 30 minutes, the private terminal had transformed into a hub of intense activity. The replacement pilot had already arrived, professionally dressed, and treating every passenger with noticeable respect. The original pilot had been escorted to the administration office, where he sat waiting for the emergency board meeting that would decide his fate. The businessman was on his phone, pacing near the large terminal windows as he spoke with board members. No, I want everyone on video conference in 15 minutes, not an hour, he said firmly. What happened today isn't just a PR issue. It's about who we are as a company. His free hand gestured as he spoke, his wedding ring catching the sunlight streaming through the windows. Meanwhile, his wife was speaking with other passengers who had witnessed the incident. Many of them were sharing their own recordings and business cards, offering to send their videos and written statements about what they had seen. The young baggage handler, who had tried to help earlier, approached her hesitantly. Ma'am, he said, his voice quiet but determined. I just wanted to say, this wasn't the first time. Some of us tried to report him before, but he glanced around nervously. Nothing ever happened. The businessman overheard this and ended his phone call. Would you be willing to make an official statement? He asked the young man. Everything you've seen, everything you know. The baggage handler stood straighter and nodded firmly. Other staff members began coming forward too. A flight attendant shared how she had requested transfers to avoid working with the pilot. A maintenance worker described discriminatory comments he had overheard. The receptionist pulled up old complaint files that had mysteriously disappeared from the system. I want every one of these stories documented, the businessman told his assistant over the phone. Every incident, every complaint, every cover-up. This isn't just about one pilot anymore. This is about fixing a broken system. The terminal's TV screens, which usually showed weather reports and flight schedules, were now displaying breaking news. Someone had posted a video of the incident online, and it had already gone viral. The businessman's phone was buzzing constantly with calls from news outlets and civil rights organizations. His wife touched his arm gently. This is bigger than us now, she said softly. He nodded, reaching for her hand. Maybe it needs to be, he replied. Maybe this is exactly what the industry needs, a wake-up call. The replacement pilot approached them with the flight plan, treating them both with the exact same professional courtesy. "We're ready whenever you are," he said, handing them both copies of the safety briefing. Just then, the businessman's phone lit up with a message. The board members were all online, waiting for the emergency meeting. He looked at his wife. "Go ahead to Chicago," he said. "I need to stay and handle this. This might take a while, but it needs to be done right." She squeezed his hand. "Do what needs to be done," she said. "Make it count." As she walked toward the plane with the new pilot, other passengers and staff members nodded respectfully. The young baggage handler was already sitting with HR, giving his statement. The terminal buzzed with an energy of change, of something long overdue finally being addressed. The businessman walked into the conference room, where a large screen showed the faces of board members waiting to begin the meeting. He placed his wife's recording device on the table, along with a stack of new complaints and testimonies they'd gathered. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," he began, his voice firm and clear. "Today we're not just discussing one incident. We're talking about the future of our company and the kind of example we want to set for the entire aviation industry." As the terminal returned to its normal activities, there was a sense that nothing would quite be the same after today. Sometimes it takes just one moment, one incident, to spark the changes that should have happened long ago. The next few days brought waves of change that nobody at the private aviation company had expected. The video of the incident had reached millions of views across social media platforms, sparking intense discussions about discrimination in the luxury travel industry. But unlike many viral moments that fade away, this one was different. It was leading to real change. The businessman had spent hours in that emergency board meeting, and by the end, the company had agreed to a complete overhaul of their policies. The pilot was officially terminated within 24 hours, but that was just the beginning. The company announced a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, backed by a new reporting system that prevented complaints from being buried or ignored. "We're setting up an independent review board," the businessman explained to the gathered staff members in the terminal. "Every complaint will be investigated thoroughly, and there will be no more cover-ups." The young baggage handler who had spoken up sat in the front row, nodding with approval as others around him took notes. The businessman's wife had returned from her Chicago trip to find her story had inspired others to come forward. Private aviation clients from across the country began sharing similar experiences they'd faced. What had started as one incident was uncovering a pattern that stretched across the entire industry. "Your courage changed everything," the receptionist told her when she came back through the terminal. "People aren't afraid to speak up anymore." The terminal itself felt different now, more welcoming, more professional, with staff members treating every client with the same high level of respect. The company launched a comprehensive training program, bringing in experts to educate staff about unconscious bias and professional conduct. But they didn't stop there. They reached out to other private aviation companies, sharing their new policies and encouraging industry-wide changes. Television news crews arrived to cover the story, but the businessman and his wife chose to focus on solutions rather than publicity. "This isn't about shaming one company or one person," the businessman told a reporter. "It's about making sure everyone in this industry understands that excellence in service means serving everyone excellently." A month after the incident, the young baggage handler had been promoted to customer service supervisor, part of the company's new initiative to reward staff who demonstrated true professional values. The terminal staff now reflected the diversity of their clients, and customer satisfaction scores had actually improved. The company's new training videos included real stories from clients and staff, teaching through experience rather than just rules. "We're not just changing policies," the businessman explained during a staff meeting. "We're changing the culture." His wife had become a quiet force for change in her own right. Other executives' wives began reaching out to her, sharing their own stories and asking for advice on handling discrimination. She worked with the company to establish a scholarship program, helping people from all backgrounds enter the aviation industry. The old pilot's replacement was a woman who had faced her own battles in the industry. "Every time I walk through this terminal," she told the staff, "I see what's possible when people stand up for what's right." Her professional conduct and excellent service became the new standard for the company. 6 months after that morning in the terminal, the businessman and his wife stood together at an industry conference, where their company was being recognized for its groundbreaking changes in professional standards and inclusive practices. Other companies were now following their lead, adopting similar policies and training programs. "Sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes," the businessman's wife said during her acceptance speech. "But those changes only happen when people are brave enough to stand up, speak out, and then work together to make things better." As they flew home that evening, the terminal staff greeted them with the same professional courtesy they now showed to every client. The young baggage handler, now in his supervisor's uniform, smiled as he walked past. In the end, what had started as one person's prejudice had become the catalyst for an entire industry to look at itself in the mirror and choose to be better. 1 year after the incident, the private aviation industry had undergone a remarkable transformation. The businessman and his wife had turned their experience into a powerful force for change, creating a non-profit organization dedicated to promoting equality in luxury travel and aviation services. The terminal where everything began had become a model training center for other aviation companies. Staff members from across the country came to learn about their new protocols and inclusive practices. The young baggage handler, now a full-fledged training coordinator, often shared his story during these sessions. "I remember standing there that day, wanting to speak up but feeling afraid," he would tell the trainees. "Now I teach others how to find their voice and use it to make a difference." His training sessions were always packed, with attendees taking detailed notes and asking thoughtful questions. The former pilot's story had also taken an unexpected turn. After losing his job, he had gone through a period of deep reflection. Instead of becoming bitter, he reached out to the businessman's wife through a heartfelt letter, acknowledging his mistakes and asking how he could make amends. To everyone's surprise, she agreed to meet with him. Their conversation, which lasted several hours, led to something unexpected. The former pilot began speaking at aviation industry events about his journey of understanding and change. His honest accounts of confronting his own biases helped others recognize and address their prejudices. The company's scholarship program had already helped 20 students from diverse backgrounds enter aviation school. One of them, a young woman from a small town, was now completing her pilot training. "When I was little, I never thought this was possible," she told a local newspaper. "But now, the sky's literally the limit." The businessman's wife had become a sought-after speaker at industry conferences, but she always kept her message focused on practical changes rather than personal recognition. "It's not about being perfect," she would say. "It's about being willing to learn, grow, and do better every day." Their story had sparked similar movements in other luxury service industries. High-end hotels, exclusive restaurants, and premium car services were all examining their practices and implementing new training programs. The ripple effect was creating waves of positive change across the entire service sector. 2 years after that fateful morning at the terminal, the businessman and his wife stood together at a National Aviation Awards ceremony. Their company wasn't just receiving an award, they were giving one, having established an annual recognition for excellence in inclusive service practices. The terminal had become unrecognizable from that day 2 years ago. The walls now displayed photographs of diverse aviation pioneers, and the staff reflected the wide range of clients they served. The young baggage handler, who had risen to become the head of customer relations, was now mentoring new employees himself. During the ceremony, a surprise speaker took the stage, the receptionist who had been working that morning of the incident. She had gone on to develop a widely adopted training program for frontline aviation staff. "That day changed all of us," she told the audience. It showed us that one person's courage can inspire others to create real change. The businessman's wife had written a book about their experience, but rather than focus on the negative incident, she filled it with stories of positive transformation from across the industry. The book became required reading in aviation training programs, teaching future professionals about the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. Their nonprofit organization had expanded to include mentorship programs, connecting experienced aviation professionals with newcomers from all backgrounds. The former pilot even contributed, sharing his story as a cautionary tale and an example of how people can learn and change. During the award ceremony, the businessman shared a powerful moment with the audience. 2 years ago, we could have let anger guide our response, he said. Instead, we chose to create lasting change. Today, when I walk through any private terminal in this country, I see the difference that choice made. The company's training center had become so successful that they opened satellite locations across the country. Each center featured a wall of testimonials, stories from staff and clients about moments when speaking up had made a difference. The young woman from their first scholarship class was now featured prominently, having completed her pilot training and joined the company. As the ceremony concluded, the businessman and his wife didn't head to their private jet. Instead, they stayed to talk with the maintenance staff, flight crews, and ground personnel. They knew that real change happens not just in grand moments and ceremonies, but in daily interactions and small acts of respect. The story of that morning in the terminal was still shared, but now it was told as the beginning of something positive. A moment when one incident of discrimination became the catalyst for an entire industry to transform itself. It proved that sometimes the most powerful response to negativity is to use it as fuel for positive change.